I have a hot take. I actually like all of Life is Strange games. And while I like all of them to varying degrees, I think all 3 installments have a reason to exist and to be appreciated. There's no doubt that all of the games are different, and at the same time that they share a certain DNA of Life is Strange. They all tell a very different story of evil, and every time a game has been presented with a new installment, they would take it up a notch. For those 5 whole people on the internet who've never heard of Life is Strange video games, let me catch you up to speed. Life is Strange is an episodic adventure game that was released in collaboration with Square Enix and Don't Nod, and later also by Deck 9. This franchise was started in 2015 with the release of the first game featuring a protagonist of an 18-year-old Max Caulfield in Arcadia Bay. She's a shy girl who studies photography in Blackwell Academy, and she is studying under her teacher, Mac Jefferson. She sees visions of a coming storm and realizes that she can rewind time. Though there are limitations, she starts to alter events, for better or for worse. This game has a lot of topics to touch on, starting from alcoholism to PTSD, imposter syndrome, and insecurity fitting of a coming-of-age story, to much heavier topics like suicide, rape, and murder. Some reviews back in 2015 have been both praising the developers and bashing them at the same time for bringing such taboos to a game that was clearly marketed and created for young adults. Despite having stilted graphics and lip sync, the game very quickly became a classic in the indie community at least, and to a larger degree within the video games. The second game came out between 2018 and 2019 and has raised quite a bit of controversy despite having an overall positive critical acclaim. And I can understand why, but I also disagree with some of the YouTubers calling the game soulless. I think this game is a bit too personal for some in a way that they don't necessarily understand. The game revolves around 2 brothers from Hispanic descent in a very obviously post-Trump election era. If you're wondering what I mean, first of all, I'm very jealous of you. Secondly, you can imagine a game with bigger topics like racism, extreme religiousness, prejudice, and self-fulfilling prophecy of racial disparities leading to a higher criminal involvement. To get into the plot more would mean quite a bit of heavy spoilers, so if you have not played this game, I urge you to play it and experience those yourself, as I don't want to deprive you of this experience. We'll talk more about the plot and themes later after the spoiler warning. And lastly, the third installment, Life is Strange True Colors. That came out in September 2021, and this time not teasing us with episodic release, and finally letting us explore the whole narrative in one fell swoop. Once again, the reception of the third franchise was not received with universal praise like the first one, many condemning the game for trying to return back to safer topics and the structure of the first game. And after the second game has received such heavy backlash, it was understandable. Here, Alex Chen moves to a mining town of Haven Point in Colorado. Soon after, an incident in the mine claims the life of her brother, and she, together with his 2 friends, investigate his death. It does sound familiar to the first game, right? Here we are again, young adults investigating a crime in a small town. But as I said before, I still like this game. And most importantly, I like the main conflict, evil, that is presented in the story best. It seems to me the most realistic and overarching evil that we see more commonly in 21st century. Yes, it was not executed in the most perfect way, but it still stood taller to me than the first one. And I genuinely suggest that at this point that you play the games yourself and enjoy the narratives at their best on your own time before continuing this video. So pause this video now, go to your Steam or PS, and just enjoy the narrative. Come back when you're done. Spoilers ahead. Life is Strange 1. What's the story and what's the evil here? In the first installment, Life is Strange, players are introduced to the protagonist Max Caulfield, who discovers her ability to rewind time while attending a Blackwell Academy in the fictional town of Arcadia Bay in Oregon. The plot of the game unfolds as Max reconnects with her childhood friend Chloe Price, and the two embark on a journey to uncover the truth behind Rachel Amber's disappearance. Along the way, we get to know their friends, family, enemies, each with their own struggles and secrets. We meet Max in the first scene that throws us into the deep ends of the story. A storm is raging. Max is trying to get into the lighthouse, but we don't know why, and most importantly, she doesn't either. It turns out all of this was a dream, or rather a vision, during a lecture that we will hear many times again before this game ends. Max then slowly introduces us, the audience, to her classmates, her teachers, and with her signature teenage aloofness, retreats to the bathroom, where she witnesses a murder of her childhood friend Chloe. It is then that she discovers her power to rewind time. Although, before we move on, I have a bone to pick narratively, consistency speaking, with this discovery. Skip to this timestamp if you don't want me to digress. In all the cases, when Max rewinds time just a little and not through a photograph, she always finds herself in the same spot where she began the rewinding. That's the whole plot of her saving Chloe many, many times, among others when she saves her on the railway track, when it's physically impossible to do all of the stuff that she needs to do in order to save Chloe before the train runs her over. Or how they break into the principal's office. In case you don't remember how it went down, Max and Chloe are breaking into the school at night, and Max makes a somewhat of a makeshift bomb to blow up the lock of the principal's office door. They succeed, but then trigger an alarm. And so Max goes into the room, rewinds time, and is still in the principal's office before they set the bomb on the lock. Opens the door and from the other side, and all is well. No time continuum ripped apart. Now, there are many, many examples that I could list with the exact same purpose. But let's get back to the first scene. Nathan Prescott storms into the girls' bathroom where he is meeting Chloe Price. They have a fight. He pulls out a gun, which is then fired at Chloe. And then still in the bathroom, Max rewinds so she can save Chloe. Cut. We are back in the classroom with the same lecture that we just came from. There's probably around 5 to 10 minutes of playtime you have done in the game altogether, and I think even less if we're to take her perspective of the timeline, especially if you don't go through her phone and journal clicking all of the available buttons to you in the very first minute, and I reckon that it probably would take you about as long to make a makeshift bomb with Warren's instruction in game time as well as in her point of time. So why, do I ask you, is she not back in the bathroom where she had started her rewind as Chloe gets shot? Why is she back in that godforsaken lecture about putting any one of you in a dark corner and capturing you in a moment of desperation and daguerreotypes? If you've not played the game yourself, you just have to know that you'll hear this particular lecture about 4 times, not only in the first chapter but throughout the whole game, and there is no way to skip it. So it frustrated me lately while I was replaying the game, though I do understand why it's there. It's important for the plot, and especially if you're a new player, but replaying, I always wanted to skip it, at the very least in the 2 chapters last in the game. Alright, rant over. You can come back now. So, right. We're back in school. We save Chloe. We end up in an altercation with Nathan afterward. And Chloe then comes and saves us from that. But not actually Warren who's the one beaten. But sure. Wait, details. We escape to Chloe's place. We learn about her life between when Max knew her and now. It's clear that she's endured a lot of pain, having lost her father, her mother remarrying a person who, according to Chloe, is a step douche, and her friend Rachel having disappeared. Chloe grew to be often resentful and harsh. She is a very identifiable teenage rebel. One thing leads to another, and Max agrees to investigate Rachel Amber's disappearance with Chloe. Though one person, or rather their actions, interfere with their investigation. Kate Marsh. Ever since the last cool students' party, she'd been fighting with a storm of bullying, starting from Nathan drugging her at a party and her unaware actions being caught on video that goes viral, to a large degree thanks to Victoria, our resident queen bee. Kate faces daily bullying at school, criticism and outright threats from her family and church that we can see in her room. We get more acquainted with Kate during the second chapter, and to play through the chapter and not realize that she had been disappearing as a person is to be blind. I was not necessarily blind, but I was complicit. I was played through games in such a way that I leave as little uninvestigated as possible, but I was not prepared for what had come after the investigation. I didn't pay attention to her as much as I needed, solely because I was mostly focused on the detective side of the story. I didn't think to pay much attention to which psalm lines she had underlined, partially because I'm not religious, and partially because I just didn't think that it was important. And that inattentiveness, partially, killed Kate in my playthrough, as well as the harm that has been done by Victoria and Nathan, not to mention the elephant in the dark room. Let's get back to that and first continue on with Max's discovery soon after Kate's suicide attempt in brackets. Nathan Prescott. In the principal's office that Max and Chloe sneak into, they find files that prove that Nathan knows something about Rachel or may have been even involved in her disappearance somehow. We can see that Nathan, despite his bad grades and overall behavioral issues, is seen as the golden boy in a near literal sense, as he comes from a rich, affluent family from Arcadia Bay, which puts pressure on him, as well as giving him a free pass to frivolity and irresponsible behavior. Just one example of many would be him bringing a gun to his school, but then again, it seems to me a common accessory nowadays in school, so what do I know? Nathan's story is probably the one that I doubt most in the game. We learn, at the end of the game, we learn about his true involvement of the murders and disappearances. We learn about the pressures his family put on him, and it's genuinely sad to see and understand that this is the root of his behavior. But what I find very conflicting is the last phone call that we hear from Nathan to Max. It's hard for me to believe that a person so intimately involved in drugging girls and handing them off to a psycho teacher to do God knows what with, so far as he is aware, will develop empathy and regret at the 11th hour. The disappearance of Rachel Ambers happened 6 months before the events of the game. He's had months to struggle with his conscience, and since he had continued the same actions with Kate, it's clear he is not remorseful to the extent that he would need to be to leave this vulnerable message to Max, who has been undermining him the entire time before. The only sliver of understanding would come from perhaps Nathan witnessing the murder of Victoria, who is his closest friend, but that is a speculation over events that happened behind the scenes for us. Beyond that, the fact that both Victoria and Nathan were killed by Jefferson, we don't know anything for sure. So, as much as I want to believe his remorse, I struggle to sympathize with Nathan as his voice message plays in the last chapter. Victoria Chase. Victoria is an excellent character in my opinion. She's bitchy and ambitious, but most of all, she is insecure and expresses it in the only way she knows how, by making everyone else feel insecure. It's the only way to boost her self-esteem that she knows. She is good because everyone else is worse. That's why she bullies both her friends and classmates. There's one thing I like in the playthrough when Kate survives and we can visit her in the hospital. There, Max can find a card that Victoria signed. I think it's a great way to express deep regret for her part in bullying in a very subtle way. Mark Jefferson. Now we get to our elephant in the dark room, the ultimate antagonist of the investigation. Mark Jefferson is a photography teacher. In his free time, he likes to have drugged up girls brought to him and then be tied and photographed for his art, pleasure. Doesn't matter which one is more important, or maybe that they both coexist in a non-linear fashion. His motivations and psychopathy is interesting enough that I am not going to try to cover them here, though I definitely am entertaining a thought to take a deep dive in his character and a copy of DSM manual in a future video. But he is undoubtedly doing this out of selfish reasoning. For him, that's enough, and I would argue that this is the embodiment of empirical evil in the standard moral way we see it. Philosophically speaking, there are many ways to view evil. All the definitions I am using here are coming out of conversations of philosophy and ethics. For Mark Jefferson's example, we'll turn to Kant and his categorical imperative. It is the basis of what is allowed and moral. Every person has the obligation to treat others with the same reverence that they would themselves. Interestingly enough, that rule was also stretched to animals as well. Kant believed that to treat animals cruelly is to violate the duty to himself to develop empathy. With that, a lie of omission is also violating the duty of a person to another by depriving the person of fair judgment or point of view. Mark Jefferson is not just a torturing psychopath. With that, I mean that he has no developed empathy. But he is also a liar of omission of his own actions. It is here that we come to the evil that is so clearly hanging over our heads in Life is Strange. Conclusion. In a nutshell, Life is Strange isn't just about solving a mystery. It is about shining a light on the darker sides of human nature, whether it's bullying, unchecked privilege, or outright manipulation. It is a reminder that evil can lurk where you least expect it, even in the halls of a high school. People are acting evil to each other, not simply badly, but evil. What's the difference between evil actions and bad actions? I would argue that a bad action is that which brought an unexpected bad outcome. For this, I will actually turn to Victoria's story. Yes, she's a bully, undeniably. In the second chapter, you have a chance to ask Victoria to stop bullying Kate. She brushes you off as something that Kate should have known would happen if she gets so drunk. But she then disproves it in her own way. She is one of the key reasons Kate is standing on the edge of that roof. But when we visit Kate in the hospital, we can see that Victoria didn't expect her bullying to bring such a horrible effect that could bring someone to not only consider suicide but even attempt it. Due to her young age, she's naive and cruel, but she doesn't quite comprehend the consequences to her actions. Therefore, it's a bad action. Mark Jefferson, on the other hand, is not only understanding of the possibility of consequences of his actions, he has experienced them. Rachel wasn't the first nor the last girl that died because of his actions, and he enjoys it in a certain way. Therefore, evil action. And this firmly puts us in the evil category of moral empirical evil. He knows his actions are bringing harm. They are very physical and easily identified. Since the beginning of time, murder for personal pleasure is something that all cultures saw as something evil, not just bad, accidental harm, but very calculated and measured, and as intentional murder, whatever Jefferson else does is clear, at the very least, in the aspect of morality. Now let's turn to a different type of evil in the second installment of Life is Strange franchise. Right off the bat, Life is Strange 2 makes it very obvious this is a darker story. We're thrust into the main topic with the scene of a police car responding to a 1010 in progress. For those unfamiliar with police lingo, fight in progress. Request for backup follows, then we hear a gunshot sound, then a strange force pushing over a police car. 10:53, man down on the radio. A full swarm of police cars appear. Fade to black. Now from this 1 minute of the intro, we can already guess that we will be dealing with much more serious topics than that of the first game. You know the theory of Chekhov's gun? If there's a gun in the first chapter, in the final chapter, it will be shot. And boy does it shoot. Wildly, angrily, pointlessly. The Chekhov's gun of the police fired in the first minute. Go figure how many times it will strike again before the game ends. We're introduced to a quiet life of two kids. Sean Diaz, a teenager with a typical boyish disdain of a teenager who wants to be cool and not play with his little brother, Daniel. Daniel Diaz, a 9-year-old with his still intact innocence. Meet their father, a car mechanic, Esteban Diaz, a kind soul who raised his 2 boys on his own after their mother has left them. We get to experience their life how it normally is for about 30 minutes of playtime before it's completely uprooted. Daniel gets into a small fight with a neighbor bully, and then Sean steps in to protect Daniel. That's the 10-10 police responded to. Before the police officer can actually make any judgment of the situation at hand, the bully kid falls and has what seems to be an epileptic seizure. But of course, the cop's reaction is what you would expect. The gun is drawn, the kids are ordered to lie on the ground with their hands on their heads, because what else could be possibly more dangerous than 2 kids, one of whom is 9 years, having a fight with a neighborhood kid? What's the 9-year-old gonna do to an adult trained police officer? Steal his crayons? The only thing more dangerous is obviously a woman having a choice over her own body, I imagine. Their dad intervenes, trying to explain to the officer that these are good kids and it's just a misunderstanding. But before he finishes his sentence, he's shot. What is it with trigger-happy authorities? Now, in this particular situation, Daniel is a bit more than a normal kid. It's him who's telekinetic, and he throws the police officer and his car to the side. He collapses, Sean picks up unconscious Daniel and runs away, wherever he can think of. Was that a super great idea? No, probably not. But is it an understandable one after seeing your father shot for nothing and your brother just turning a car upside down because he got angry? Yeah, I'd say it is. Simply due to the fact that the story is structured as a journey, we hardly meet the same people in more than one chapter, and that means that their psychology can be developed only in so many minutes of the gameplay. So unlike the first chapter, we will look at the evil on a more global scale of the second game rather than delving into the characters and their actions. So let's look at the plot. What follows is a string of unfortunate events on the road. Sean decides to run to Mexico, where their father is from. But boy, is it a long road from Seattle. If they were to take a car to Puerto Lobos, it would take them 27 hours. If they were walking as they are, it would take them 3 full weeks to walk there, without a single stop for drink, food, or sleep. They stop at a gas station, though, where, regardless of whether Sean or Daniel steal any food, there is a man that confronts them about it and demands that they prove that they are innocent. Naturally, that doesn't come across as terribly friendly, and eventually Sean finds himself locked up in a storage/office space, beaten up. This is unfortunately far from the last extreme case of prejudice and, plainly speaking, racism that they come across. Daniel helps Sean to get out, and the pair continue on their trek. Till one day in December, they get to the town where their grandparents are, which keeps them safe for a while, but not for long. Police are tipped off, and the brothers are now fleeing as stowaways on a train further with a group of young adults they meet during their time at a Christmas market. They get to California and stay with the group for a while. Sean develops a romantic feeling for one of the group, and all seems well, as they are already living under the cover of the law, as they work on a not so terribly legal weed farm. It's not so bad if you don't think too hard about what a 9-year-old has to do on a weed farm, and boy does the game provide some riveting gameplay during this part.
I should clean my scissors. They're a mess.
Then Finn, the bad influence boy, has a brilliant idea to go steal the money from their drug overlord. But in this game, we already know before we even get there, nothing ever goes smoothly for Sean and Daniel. They get caught in the action. Daniel lets his power take over him, whirl of objects flying. Daniel has lost control completely, and the consequences are dire. Sean wakes up in the hospital with the right eye lost. The FBI are onto him. Daniel is nowhere near, and the guards are watching his every step now. He manages to escape, though, from the hospital, adding grand theft auto to the list of his already lengthy offenses in the eyes of the law, which is not surprising since he only has one now. Oh my god, that was so bad. I'm sorry. Anyway, he escapes, determined to find Daniel and take him with him so that they can continue running. And Daniel, in the meantime, became a prepubescent messiah at a cult in Nevada. On the road to Haven Point, Sean encounters two guys that are neatly summarizing the very nature of the evil presented in the game. They ask Sean to say things in Spanish, one of which is, "This is not my country." If you refuse that particular line, they give you an even more condescending choice, singing for them. And for the life of me, I could not find a single playthrough where anyone agreed to sing, so I'm not even sure if this footage exists. And fair enough, that feels like a terrible situation to put anyone, let alone a character that you've already established as a certain connection to, experienced so much with around 6 to 8 hours of game time that it takes you to bring Sean to this moment of the story. The writers didn't beat around the bush here. It quite bluntly put us in the shoes of a pretty huge portion of American society. I was quite nervous after Trump's election, and not without reason, I might add. Whatever the minority or not even minority you belong to, because women are also targeted, though in a very different way. You could extrapolate the feeling of distrust of the authorities in a situation that you can't understand and running away, and the experience of racism that we see in the game Life is Strange 2, and empathize with more than one specific group of minorities. Though it is at this point that I'm going to point out that the studio making Life is Strange is located in Paris, France, and the two head writers of the studio making Life is Strange 2 are white French dudes, so I'm a bit confused to how to feel about this. On the one hand, I enjoy the story. On the other, was there really not a single writer that was maybe actually familiar with the experiences and could give it a bit more depth, like with this horrible familiarity? Like, doesn't it kind of feel hollow when a white man writes a story about slavery from the perspective of the slaves? Is it not kind of f***ed up? A couple of guys living in France talking about institutional racism in the States from a perspective of a member of a Latino community? I don't think that two white French men should have been taking on the role of a storyteller as Sean Diaz. If they specifically wanted to talk about racism in the States, you can still do that, perhaps as an onlooker, as an unwilling participant, or even as the antagonist. We can infinitely debate whether playing this game is hypocritical in this aspect or not, but let us get into the evil of the story. Even now, with 2 chapters in the game left, there can be no doubt about the type of villainy we are confronted with. It's racism. This time, Kant won't help us much with his categorical imperative. This time we'll turn to Hannah Arendt, a German philosopher and historian in the 20th century, for some clarification. She wrote a lot on totalitarian regimes, political philosophy, and the origins of evil in the system. Sounds appropriate, right? In her work on totalitarianism, she describes systemic evil, an evil which grows, but for which not one single person is responsible for. It is a coagulation of thought that has emerged into a dark, brutal reality, and the consequences of which are often discrimination. In her work, she was looking through this lens at Nazi Germany and Stalinist Soviet Union. In both, there is a mountain of evidence to anti-Semitism. But let's take a look at the narrative structure of Life is Strange 2 with the help of her framework on systemic evil. As a preface, I'd like to clarify that I am not comparing USA to Nazi Germany or Stalinist USSR. It's very different. But the presence of systemic injustice that takes place particularly against people of color is obvious to even 2 white dudes in France. So let's just roll with this hypocrisy for now. Systemic evil is easily identified within empirical events, like that of the 2 guys beating up Sean in the desert. If you as a player don't agree to one or more of their requests, they will end up beating Sean up. But what caused that evil? That's the hard and quite unknowable question. We can delve into perhaps the childhood of this person who is carrying out the empirical evil, but his actions are most certainly not a singularity. In the game, we meet plenty of characters expressing unease and distrust to Sean or Daniel because they are the other. Children of immigrants that don't look like us is a concept so deeply confusing to me in the context of American history. If anyone should be the other in this country, historically speaking, is actually the white people. They are the original immigrants there. So why would this notion of American exceptionalism develop into a belief about anything such as a real American? I truly don't believe that there is one single trigger to racism in America. There is no one to execute, no one to put the responsibility on. This is something that developed over centuries into this force of systemic evil. Yes, no doubt that we can see one orange trigger that perhaps threw some gasoline on the fire, but he didn't come up with any of this. He just managed to leverage it to his personal gain. This essay is not about American history, so let's get back to the topic at hand. Sean and Daniel experience empiric outbursts of systemic evil that are loosely unified in rhetoric of not belonging and prejudice against any group of minorities. There are individuals that are to blame for their participation in this systemic evil, but with or without those 5 to 10 individuals Sean or Daniel encounter, prejudice and anger towards other ethnic groups doesn't dissipate. Let's move forward to our third and final installment of Life is Strange. Life is Strange 3, or rather, True Colors. Life is Strange True Colors is the shortest game of all of the installments. Not only is it a game that feels purely time-wise less impactful, but your choices are also less important than that of the first 2 installments in a way that affects the narrative. Though I still enjoyed the game for its philosophical question of evil. It is also impossible to talk about Life is Strange True Colors without actually talking a tiny bit about Deck 9. After Life is Strange 2, the developer company Don't Nod and the previous 2 installments have stepped away, and the logical continuation of the franchise fell to Deck 9, who have also created DLC for the first game. They have been accused of pretty severe HR violations, and apparently for some Nazi symbolism were slipped into the game files during the development. This is purely an acknowledgement, rather than a comment on the claims, since all of the sources I looked into were quite confusing and not really giving much actual details of what had happened. Needless to say, we're off to a rocky start. We meet our protagonist, Alexandra, or Alex Chen, in either a psychologist or a social worker's office. She's about to meet her brother, Gabriel, or Gabe Chen, in his small mining town, Haven Springs in Colorado. She gets to know all of the characters of the game in the first chapter: Gabe's stepson, his girlfriend, the owner of the bar where Gabe works, and the rest. In the first interaction that we have with Gabe's stepson, Ethan, he reveals to Alex how he's about to sneak off to play in the old mines. Whether you tell that information to Gabe right away or later, there's no consequence. Problem is, today the mining company Typhon is scheduled to set off a blast in their mines and have warned not to be in the surrounding area during the explosion. Naturally, Ethan is there, so Alex, Gabe, and his best friend Ryan head out to find him and bring him back to safety. Gabe makes a call to Typhon in order to stall the explosion in order to find Ethan in time. We find Ethan, but just as everything seems to look up, a blast is set off and the avalanche of rock trips Gabe and he falls off a cliff, buried under massive stones. Alex is determined to find justice for her brother and starts an investigation with 2 friends of Gabe, both of which become her possible love interests. At first, they blame Mac Loudon, the security officer of Typhon in Haven Springs. The theory at first is that the emergency distress call made by Gabe to hold off the explosion was ignored by Mac. But soon we find out that it wasn't him who ignored it. They start to suspect Diane Jacobs, the head of Typhon organization in Haven Springs. But after stealing her flash drive, they find out that she too was under pressure from Typhon to make that blast happen regardless of the consequences. But why specifically that night, in the old mines? Best to ask the first-hand source, Jeb. the owner of Black Lantern and the hero of Haven Springs. He used to be the foreman in the old mines and supposedly led out 12 people during the explosion, which after the mines were closed off. So Alex asks him to explain what had happened there and why would Typhon blow these mines up as a cover-up. Jeb then takes her to the mines at night. Do you already feel where this could be going? Yeah, of course he pulls a gun on Alex, and she then falls down a ventilation shaft at the mines where she, battered and surprisingly alive, discovers that Jeb was responsible for the explosion. Miraculously, she gets out of the mines and confronts Jeb at the town council meeting. He admits and asks for forgiveness. Whether the town council believes you or not depends on your past choices, but it doesn't really matter much. Evil. Who's the antagonist here? Jeb? Probably the most straightforward answer, but not really. He's kind to Alex. He is apologetic even though he does commit pretty terrible stuff, covering his and Typhon's ass. Is the antagonist Mac or Diane, who work for Typhon and are complicit in lying for the organization? Also not really. They were just saving themselves in their own way. The true antagonist is the corporation, but we don't have any one singular person to blame for the atrocities that have been committed. It is not really anyone's fault that this happened, according to Hannah Arendt. She called this radical evil. It's more detailed than that. There's a system in place in the world that makes it understandable that these stories happen. It's capitalism. That's a system prioritizing the creation of wealth over humanity. That's why we in the real world have stories of Purdue Pharma and the Sacklers at the Realm. And it's great that we now know that this particular example exists, but the stories of human abuse and the manipulation sits at the core of capitalistic system. To succeed, you need to earn more, cut corners, annihilate the competition, and come out on top no matter the cost. And sometimes, like in fictional mining company Typhon, that will mean the cost of lies and lives. There's no one to blame. We all play this game. We all participate in this system willingly or reluctantly, but that does entail that we inadvertently profit from someone's suffering. Whether we buy fast fashion clothing that was most likely made by underage workers with a salary less than a living wage, or we buy stock of companies on Wall Street. You watching this video also contributes to that same system, as I myself am trying to accumulate my wealth and the possibility to do this as my job, not to mention the profits that go to Google. That's not just radical evil, it's radical evil as systemic evil. Contemporary philosophers talk less about the state's evil and more about global systems in place, like global corporations, legal systems, and even artificial intelligence, as a part of systemic radical evil, where no singular human can be held responsible. Capitalism fits the bill. Whether you yourself believe capitalism to be evil or not, that's completely up to you. I'm not going to change your mind. The only thing that I am saying here is that Life is Strange True Colors has the capitalistic structure act as the antagonist, and her agents are blameless, bringing us firmly in the radical as systemic evil conversation. Conclusion. All of the three games have their ups and downs. I can honestly say I enjoyed them all equally for their own merits. The first game for its nostalgia-filled storytelling, the second game for its harshness and injustice for two kids who just try their best, and True Colors for its wholesome story of Alex in a world that asks big questions. I'm not saying that it didn't have issues with each of the games in their own way. I cringed whenever Max or Chloe would utter something bizarro, or Sean would act like an idiot or an ass. I disliked the predictability of True Colors, and I wanted it to take more chances. But not one work of art is going to fulfill every expectations we can have from it, especially with video games. Video games that have a strong narrative tend to have us play as the character in the narrative, becoming that character for the duration of the game. We inadvertently live through their experience, save for the physical part. But our minds allow us to travel and inhabit that character, feel their emotions through the story that the game is telling. And I think Life is Strange is probably one of the best games to have done this successfully, having touched so many minds and hearts of gamers. At the very least, the first game still holds an overwhelmingly positive review status on Steam, with the rest of the games holding a commendable very positive. Apart from the outstanding reviews, all the games have a certain kindness to them, even if the protagonists find themselves in dire situations. And I think we could all use a little bit of kindness every once in a while. Alright, that's all I got for today. See me in the next one. Next up, Blue Eye Samurai. So, while I was editing this video, some pretty huge news dropped. We are now officially waiting for Life is Strange 4. That Life is Strange Double Exposure is coming to us on 29th of October 2024. So this is half a year away, and we're only hearing about this now. This is absolutely fantastic news. I can't wait to experience a new Life is Strange story. That being said, I am a little bit disappointed that we're going to see, again, Max Caulfield. Yes, we're going to see her age a little bit, and we're going to see her future and how it developed after the first game. So I'm excited about that. And she got some new powers. She is now traveling between parallel universes, apparently. So that's exciting. Yeah, I am very excited to see how it turns out. That being said, I am a little bit skeptical. So I am trying to be cautiously optimistic. I personally would have preferred if they would just picked a different character and just gone with exploring a different persona than Max Caulfield again, because we know her from the first games. We know her psychology, give or take, and we also have made a pretty huge choice that would define quite a bit of her life in the first game, in the end of the first game. So I am a little bit worried about how that choice is going to be dealt with. Hopefully well, but we'll see. I am cautiously optimistic. Second thing I needed to say is, in the meantime, I've also started a Twitch account where I am playing strategy games and also in the future Stardew. And yeah, we're just having fun there. So join us there. I also have an Instagram account. Everything is linked below. And yeah, I can't wait to bring you another video. The next one is Blue Eye Samurai. And yeah, I'm just very excited to have you guys see it. See you next time. Bye.